Yes. So today we're going to talk about, can I print that? I'm going to give it just a little bit of context, and then I'm going to hand it over to Becky and Megan to do the library presentation. So I'll give a little context. I'll talk about the info on resources that we send into the prison, and then we'll end with Q&A. Of course, this community loves to chat. In official anything is that you can essentially interrupt. So I hope everyone's okay with that piece, but we will have an official Q&A at the end. But if you need to, like ask questions along the way, please feel free to do that. So let's talk a little bit about the context. I think all of us are aware that students who are incarcerated do not currently have access to the internet. And as we, regardless of whether we're in this remote instruction or whether we are in the face-to-face instruction mode, we take printed academic resources, provide them to the students. So that is a lot of printing. And sorry, someone wants to know if there's a meeting going on. Yes, there is. So I will have to let her know that in a second. So anyways, when we take our printed academic resources in, one of the things that I think is important to understand is that those resources often live on beyond our class, and students will use them for other classes because they do not have access to direct access to the internet or direct access to library services. So I'll tell a brief story. Don't worry, it won't take too long. In our capstone class, which is our internship class, the first group that I taught there, it's a smaller class because it's a capstone. So there were 15 students in it. We're not currently teaching it. So this was a couple years ago. These are students who they started right when Folsom Lake started in the fall of 2016. And by the spring of the spring of 16, and by the spring of 18, they were starting to finish their program with their first semester of internship. Is that right? Maybe it was the fall of 16. Anyway, or fall of 19. Forget my dates because none of them are right. Okay. So it doesn't matter. The point is, they've been in the program for a couple semesters and they were really serious about their academics. So I walked into class one day and they were all there and they were talking, and the energy was really high in the room. And it felt like things were about to like go over the top, which I had never experienced that in a prison classroom. I experienced that in K-12, but never in the prison classroom. And I was like, whoa, what is going on? And they were like, that group has this research article on community resource centers and we don't have it, and they're trying to hide it from us. And and I don't even know where they got the article from, right? It didn't come from me, right? And I thought this doesn't, I've never experienced this in any other setting before. But I use that story to explain that really, especially students that are pursuing their academics, the presence of academic resources is absent from the prison, right? And so one of the things that's important is that when we send the information in, that we're able to allow the students to create works cited pages from work that may be above and beyond our classes, because they will keep articles. So I have a couple examples. I'm doing assignments this semester where they get the option of which piece they want to read. And so I have two examples that I put here. And at the top of what I do is at the top of the article, I just make sure the title's there and everything else that they would need to be able to cite that article in APA. So you'll notice on this article here, have no author indicated, because in APA, they need to be able to know that if they're writing a reference list. So I'm not sure if this is all of the correct information for MLA or for Chicago. Does anyone want to weigh in on whether or not I'm missing information in these two examples that I have here in your discipline for a works cited page? Is that about the right stuff? Title, author, date retrieved. That's a big thing in APA is dates. Is that?
I think it would be usable for an MLA works cited page.
Yeah.
And probably Chicago too, except there aren't any page numbers. That's the only thing that people might, also want.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. So I will add that to this piece for information to include. Boom. So hopefully that helps. I think the overall concept hopefully is clear that our arts live on sometimes beyond us. Whatever we send in lives on beyond us, and having the information on it can be very helpful to students. So, any comments, experience with this, thoughts that you all have before I hand this over to Becky and Megan? You all are so talkative this morning.
I have a question, Glenda.
Yeah.
When articles or resources are provided, and I know every instructor is going to be different, is there, I guess maybe it's two questions. One, where do they keep these articles once they're, once they're there, where are they kept? But two, also, depending on the resource provided, when there is an author, is supplemental information about the author ever provided if it's not like embedded within the article?
Ooh. Well, that's a good question. I don't do that. Is that something we should be doing? I'm answering the second question. Do other
No,
people?
I only asked just because sometimes, that's another layer of sometimes, I mean, a lot of times it's included in an article in a journal and, things like that. So it's like, and most people wouldn't do that, but without access to an internet to know who that person is sometimes. And most of what we have is good stuff, but even thinking in terms of, equity and diversity and diverse voices, there is that element too of, that kind of, in one of our frameworks in libraries, we always say authority is contextual. So someone's expertise, and just something that's been coming up more in our own discussions is that piece of who the people are. If it's lacking, it might be interesting to grab somewhere if possible, and it may not be relevant, but sometimes it might be really important to know who that person is, because it might become more relevant to those students in particular as well.
I've done that before, Becky. I gave students a chapter from a book from a person who was himself formerly incarcerated, and I gave them kind of a bio about that. And I have had students there saying, can we have an author who is transgender? Can you find something? So I did that once as well, but usually I don't. But I think that's a really good point, because the students are sometimes very interested in hearing from someone who, shares a similar background. So that's good.
That is a good point. And I think that for one thing I've been reflecting on is how would students know that I'm using diverse art? Even if I'm going through that process of making sure that I'm, appealing to multiple voices in my field, how do students know that? Right? Because I'm not often like, here's the picture of the person, or here is the expertise of that person. So that's a really good point to fill in some of, I think, a racial equity gap in my particular practice. Okay, other questions?
I just wanted to say that I recently completed a survey of my students, and the handout topic comes up quite a bit because of the lack of research capability. So I try to put a handout in every package for the different classes, and there's the feedback is really positive. I do like the idea of adding a bio on the author. I'm going to start doing that. That's really a great idea. I hadn't thought of that. So thank you. But it's huge, because they just don't have any any access to the internet at all now. They used to have a little bit. Sylvia would do some homework, do some research for them, or they would give her, or the librarians in the prison would do some research, but that's all gone now. So they're depending on us completely for, supplementary material.
Yeah. Thanks, Scott. Becky, I think I forgot to answer your one question, which was about where do they keep them. Typically, in my experience, the students keep them in their cells.
Cool. So they can go through them thoroughly, and okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which means it's not broadly available, right? Right. So it stays with the individual student. I'm not aware of any place that any of the yards that we're on where we have the capability to provide like an academic library where students can access, check in and check out articles.
No, I think it's important for us to understand how restricted their life is. I mean, in one case, I was told that they have a plastic bucket that fits underneath the bunk,
Mhm.
that is, you know, a typical what you'd buy at Home Depot, and not a big case, but a maybe 10 inches high and 10 by 12, and that's where everything they have goes in that plastic bucket. So and if you've been on the prison grounds, you've seen them walking around. They have to carry their stuff in a net bag that's visible, so the COs can see what they're carrying. They can't have a closed knapsack or anything like that. Everything they carry is in a net bag that's clearly visible what's inside there. And really, a couple of changes of clothes, a plastic bucket with personal items, maybe some things hanging on the wall. I mean, these guys are very restricted in what they have. So the more we can help them with, the better.
Thanks. So I am going to now hand this over to Becky and Megan. Yes.
Sure.
Sounds great.
Let's see whether or not you really whether I've enabled your ability to use your screens.
Yeah, I do have a share screen. I'm not going to share anything yet. Megan and I, we're talking about what we're going to talk about today. And I don't know if any of you saw the email that I sent that showed that we, and by we I mean mostly Megan, made this wonderful flow chart that that really broke down what we can print and through print services, because I know this came out of a few situations where there were some questions and oh, good, perfect. Yeah, and then Megan shared the file, so it's in the chat too. So if you want to actually just click on the download link that came up next to the file name in the chat, then you can also see the flow chart there as well. We always begin any discussion with copyright and things like that with that we're not lawyers or experts whatsoever. We do our best to stay informed, but the law is pretty behind the times sometimes regarding certain things, particularly with digital use. But what we don't have like a full-on presentation. We can show I'll pull up the flow chart. But we were hoping actually of just getting questions as well as, maybe a few either real world or hypothetical situations that we can run through the flow chart, show you some tools. There's a fair use kind of evaluator that that is linked on the flow chart as well, and just brainstorm and think about things unique to exactly the situations that you have, because it is different than some of the typical things that we encounter within libraries or community colleges. So Megan,
I want to sort of,
yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I want to back up just a little bit because I don't know how familiar everybody is with copyright law to begin with. The reason that this is a concern is that one of the rights embedded in copyright is the right of reproduction, and another one is the right of distribution. So when you're making copies for a class, you're reproducing the material and you're distributing the material. And so this is why copyright comes into play, because those are rights held by the person who holds the copyright of the work. And so fair use is a commonly used system of saying, okay, I understand that the copyright holder has these rights, but I've evaluated the way that I'm going to use this source, and I have these this legal capability of using it without requesting permission because it's following fair use guidelines. So we can talk about what those fair use guidelines are. That's sort of the most common way that people are able to get around asking for permission explicitly.
Perfect. I'm going to, let me go ahead and gonna share my screen with here. This is a portion of that fair use evaluator that is linked on the document. And you can see librarycopyright.net is that kind of is the homepage. And there are different kind of details, definitions of what fair use is, general guidelines. And it should be noted that they are guidelines. So they are, you know, they're not hard and fast law. They are just kind of, you know, again, general guidelines, mostly mutually agreed upon practices. But there are times when a particular institution might take a more restrictive view, or, you know, may go a little bit more, you know, fast and loose. There are times when people do go a little further and may get challenges, cease and desist orders from making, you know, large scale copies or readers for sale, things like that. Let's see, let me make this a little bit bigger. Can everyone see that? Okay, it's hard whenever. So just curious, and is everyone generally familiar with fair use? Okay, so I see some nods and some like no. So let's just go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and click on of course. Oh, it's because I zoomed. There we go. Move things around a little bit. Does that work? Okay. So as Megan was saying, you have fair use. It's part of Section 107, the U.S. Copyright Code, and it does give these parameters for legal use without that permission. Megan, do you want to talk about the four
factors?
Yeah.
Sure, yeah. So probably that first factor, the purpose of the use, is the one that a lot of people think of as they're thinking, okay, this is for educational purposes. It's not, I'm not trying to make any money off of this. And that's great. That definitely means that your use is more likely to be fair, but you do have to keep in mind that there are all these 4 different factors. And so if this were a case where someone, you know, sued us and we had to go to court, it wouldn't just rely on, well, it was just educational use. That's just one piece of it. But I think that's the piece that probably most people are familiar with. The second piece, the nature of the copyrighted work. So this is referring to things like, is it a more factual based work or is it a more creative work? So if it's something more like, you know, an encyclopedia entry, it's a description of a historical event, it's just sort of this factual thing, then it's easier to argue for fair use. But if it's a very creative work, if it's poetry, if it's short stories, then those are going to be more likely to be protected by copyright and less fair use, like there's less favor for fair use in those cases because it's a creative work. And I want to reiterate again, these are sort of guidelines and they're very nebulous, and it's all every time there's a case about, you know, copyright infringement and whether the use was fair, the courts kind of have to deliberate each time separately. They do look at past cases, but there's nothing like hard and fast about any of these guidelines. So it's really just a spectrum of like, is it more likely to be fair or is it less likely? So the more creative it is, the less likely it is to be a fair use. For number 3, the amount of the work that you basically, in this case, that you would be copying and sending to your students. So this is another case where maybe people have heard the 10% rule. That's not actually a rule. It makes it maybe simpler for people to just say, well, it's 10% or less, so I don't have to worry about it. But that's not actually, again, any sort of law about it. Depending on all the other factors, using the entire work might be fair, or depending on various factors, using 10% is actually still too much. And it really is going to depend on all of these together. So thinking about how much of the work is it that you're using, and is it more likely to be fair because it's less of the work, or is it less likely to be fair use because you've used more of the work? And then that last one, the effect of the use on the potential market for the copyrighted work. So that's the evaluation of whether, you know, your copying and distributing of this work, does that make it so that the copyright holder is less likely to earn money on sales of the work? And this is, again, where thinking about educational uses can often lean more towards fair use. If it's like, well, you know, and then certainly in this case with incarcerated students, are these incarcerated students going to be purchasing these materials if you don't provide it to them? Probably not. So that doesn't really affect the market for the works that we're going to be copying and distributing to the students. But again, you have to kind of think about all of these 4 things in a holistic sense. And that's why tools like this can be really helpful, because this tool, it basically has a process of you just sort of go through and think about each of these 4 factors and talk a little bit about why you think that your use is more fair or less fair based on each factor, and you kind of rank it. And then at the end, it gives you that sort of ultimate score of, okay, it sounds like this use is probably more likely to be fair or probably not likely to be fair based on what you have deliberated for each of these factors.
I ask, what's the risk here? How often is Los Rios District audited for copyright infringement?
Tim, I'll take that one since I've been here a little longer. To my knowledge, I actually, in terms of, at least from the library perspective, I don't think we ever have. I don't think we've even received a cease and desist order. So usually that's kind of that's usually what it starts with, is a cease and desist order. That's what we've seen in other situations where an educational institution you know, does receive a letter. You know, it starts with a letter from the lawyers on behalf of the publishers or you know, the copyright holder. I do believe there have been some individual things related to maybe like a very small scale copyright holder, just, you know, making clear, no, I don't want it distributed that way, or you can purchase it here. There have been individual contacts from faculty members requesting copyright, requesting permission to use a work from the copyright holder. And, you know, sometimes some people have been you know, super excited that it's used in an educational context and give full permission. Other times they're very restrictive and it's, you know, it's an absolute no. You know, and they'll be very clear about that. Still though, even if it's a no, it depends on what it was. Is it full work or was it a portion? Because you could still argue fair use. So in terms of the risk, what we've typically seen is when there are individual instances with a faculty member, or even, you know, even a library where it's a small scale, maybe one work, and there's confusion over this, there is opportunity for clarification, to correct it through purchasing access in some way, because you can purchase if you want to use a particular article from a journal kind of perpetually, always, and copy it, you can always, you know, pay a fee to the copyright holder. There's an exchange copyright clearinghouse that facilitates that. So there's usually opportunities to kind of corrective measures. Usually some of the lawsuits we've seen that have gone full scale are ones where there's a large issue. Bookstores that are printing up readers and selling them with multiple works in them have often been challenged, with usually at large universities, some smaller, of course. So to my knowledge, I don't think we've ever had anything that's gone beyond maybe some of those initial conversations between copyright holder and the faculty member. But we have seen we've seen some cases come up in some in community colleges, and so we always keep an eye on those to make sure we're and really, I always at least try to take the mindset just personally of I'm doing my best without any legal expertise or guidance. We have sought clarification from our Los Rios, legal team, but they're also not copyright experts. So there's limitations within that as well, even within the field of law. So I'd say usually our advice is do your best, go in with kind of good intent, not, malicious intent to steal everything and make money on the side. I mean, as long as we're doing our best, that's really all we can do, is become educated on this, try our best. And if we've misstepped, then we usually have ample opportunities to correct it. And even then, sometimes some of those challenges actually are not always legitimate. They are ones that sometimes may fail, and fair use does prevail.
I noticed that of all of the resources that I use, the one that's the most restrictive is Harvard Business Review. They have every article is indexed, and the price of the reprint per reprinted copy is listed in their website. So it's but for the rest of it, it's pretty interesting. I think what I took away from that is the risk is pretty small, but it's a good idea to be aware of the practice and not abuse it. I think that for us, the main issue is that there is no financial incentive involved. I mean, we're not reselling this, and nor would our students likely be reselling anything. So
yeah, there is an article that I'm gonna link at some point that's called Copyright Law and the Correctional Educator. It's from 2016. It is interesting because I think it goes over some of the legal challenges that can occur. So it'll give a context within this specific these situations in which you all are teaching. But even then, this is one of those really even though it seems clear and straightforward, at the same time, it's always ambiguous, and it is really case by case.
And I want to thank Scott for bringing up the word risk, because that really was what it is about. It's about the risk of being sued. And so it's about us determining, okay, what's the likelihood that this is going to turn out bad? And there's sort of maybe a different risk calculation if it's you just making the copies yourself versus if you're requesting the printing department to make the copies for you, because then it's, the organization is the one doing the copying versus an individual. And so there is sort of a different level of risk involved in that as well.
And
I was going to say, that's really a good point. I try to do I mean, I did get the print shop to reprint a whole bunch of stuff for me for my global business class, just because I had all the PDFs and probably stepped over the line a few times in that job. But generally, I reprint my own stuff. So that's also good to know. Thank you for that.
yeah, I was going to say, in the board policies, there is some information about copyright, and it looks different than some of the other materials that we may see. It is more, I'd say, more restrictive and more conservative in the interpretation. So it's good to be familiar with all of these resources. Let's see, let me go ahead.
I don't know if you had more you wanted to talk about with fair use, but would it be worth talking about Creative Commons?
Yes, yeah, that would be, and I'll try to figure out how to close this.
I think you have to scroll up to the top of that box.
Yeah, that's probably where it is. Let's see. Yeah, you had a question, Portia?
Yeah, so so I'm teaching a music course, and I'm using like a Create a Lecture CD, but I also have a listening list CD. And I'm wondering, because this is my first time doing this, to make sure that the music is not being like distributed throughout the rest of the prison after the class is over, if I should collect CDs back to prevent like a loss of income or something for the publishers and the artists.
So just to clarify, you're saying you made copies of the music onto CDs for the students?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, again, thinking about, you know, the potential future risk and thinking about the ways to make the use more fair, I think if you could collect them back afterward, that would definitely be an argument towards it being more fair, because it's like, okay, this is for a limited purpose. This is not, I'm giving them this music for perpetuity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that would certainly help the argument, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So here's has anyone, is everyone anyone not heard of Creative Commons before?
I haven't.
Okay, so there's a few that, perfect. This is a really good resource. It's become a great place for creators of content to be able to, you know, openly license their works. They do still, you know, I mean, anytime you're creating anything, inherently you are the copyright holder. But there are different licenses that this Creative Commons organization has kind of outlined that allow individuals to use, and you can see here they're saying use and remix. What they have is the idea that there are times where you could just actually use a whole work, and just as long as you attribute the person who created it, there are ones where you can actually take a remix or recreate with certain things. So actually, let me, if I click down, this will take us down to this section.
Can I sort of back us up again a little bit?
Yep.
So copyright law, the rights that a copyright holder has are pretty comprehensive. Copyright makes it pretty restrictive that if people don't ask for permission, there's not a lot you can do with a copyrighted resource. And importantly, copyright is automatic. So if you create something, anything at all, it's automatically copyrighted. You don't have to register it with the Copyright Office. You don't even have to say this is copyrighted. It's an automatic thing.
Like Megan and I could sing a copyright song that we make up right now, and
yeah,
boom, it's
boom,
copyrighted.
It's copyrighted. So Creative Commons is an organization that came into be, I'm totally paraphrasing their history and potentially getting things wrong, but basically they were started because there were creators who wanted to say, okay, yes, this is my work. This, you know, I've created this work, but I don't want to have it be so restrictive. I don't care about every single right that copyright gives me. I want to let people do stuff with my work because that's more interesting. You get more interesting creations if other people can use the work that you've created. And so Creative Commons was started to fill that gap between saying, okay, this isn't copyrighted at all, and all rights reserved, right? So Creative Commons is saying, well, some rights reserved. And so they've developed all these different licenses, which are completely legally based. They have several layers to each license. So there's the layer where it's like, okay, this is really obvious to just a lay person. We see this first license here that Becky's got on the screen, by. Basically, all this means is you just have to say who created it. That's it. That's the entire license, is just say who created it. Underneath that, though, is actual legal language. So this is legally enforceable the same way that copyright is. So it's just as valid as traditional copyright. And that's the important piece, that if something is licensed with a Creative Commons license, that's just as legally valid as a copyright license.
So you can see that there are the different ones here, and there are 6 that they outline. And this first one is kind of the broadest because it also allows for commercial use. So you could actually, use it in something that you're making, profit from, selling, things like that. And as long as you're giving credit. And so there are other ones that are interesting in terms of that you can give credit, and whatever you create, if you remix or adapt, then you have to keep the same terms as well. So you then agree that whatever you've created, that derivative, or if you're, supplementing or building upon it, you have to share the same license. So it's that agreement. If you're going to move forward and use that information, then you're going to put the same Creative Commons license on your work that's attributing, and then therefore allowing other people to do that. I'm just going to kind of scan quickly through these because you can always look at these at your leisure. So this one is for non-commercial use. So it's similar to the one above, but it's going to exclude any commercial usage. Let's see, we have a chat.
Oh, that was me putting the link to.
Okay, perfect. And this is one we see a lot in education. We will often see a lot of creators have something like this, and it's great in education. You'll see it. I'm trying to think of a few ones. I as a parent, I see a lot of this actually with stuff that people create that is, very creative, interesting, wonderful. And it's one of those things where as long as we're not, again, selling it and using any commercial purposes, kind of, then we can use it or and give attribution. And we can also distribute or remix and adapt. That comes in handy quite a bit. And you can see they're kind of just adding up. It has this cumulative. So credit must be given to the creator, only non-commercial, and the adaptations must also have the same terms. And then our more restrictive ones is you can give credit, you can't change it. So you're just going to be kind of, using this. I know I've seen this one quite a bit. Someone's made something, it's fantastic and it's great. They just don't want anyone to mess with it. Just use it as is in its whole piece. And you can see the final one. Credit must be given to the creator, non-commercial, and then no adaptations or derivatives. Oh wait, this top one was commercial is allowed. Yeah, so there was a difference between the two. And they have the nice little icons, which are really good because the more you familiarize yourself with them, it's a quick glance sometimes then to see what's allowed. But you can actually search. So you can do searches for work. In there, they have, you can do images. There's a few other things. There's other ways to do searches online to find works that are under a Creative Commons license.
And the great thing about sort of what we're talking about in particular today is every Creative Commons license is going to allow you to make copies and share with your students. That's sort of even the most restrictive Creative Commons license still allows you to make those copies. So that's the advantage, that if all you need to do is make copies of stuff for your students and you're not worried about, can I remix this, some of the more complicated issues, then as soon as you see the Creative Commons license, it doesn't even really matter what that license was. You're like, okay, great, I'm allowed to copy it. Perfect. Don't even have to worry about it.
This is really huge for us. I got my business comm textbook from open source from a common license, and had the print shop print the books. This thing is a monster. It is. I don't know if you can see this, but it's it's,
Oh, yeah.
I mean-
Oh.
Yeah, that's large.
This is 700 pages, and it's a fantastic book. It cost us about, I don't know, $10 each to print them, but I'm going to get 3 or 4 business communications courses out of that print run. So for us, this Commons, Creative Commons licensing is fantastic.
Yeah, it's good to make sure that when you do, I mean, I know I had found a book that I recently was using in some research, and it was, it was actually, you're seeing more and more Creative Commons licensing with certain kind of more established and well-known publishers.
All right.
So you'll see something, I think this was, like Springer or something. And so that's the other thing too, is that even if you see something that's under a major publisher, it is still, I mean, it's great to open up that book or, click on it or look at for the information on that title page. A lot of times you'll then see, it may not always be super obvious. And you can see that Creative Commons license, which is just so fantastic. I feel like you win the lottery when you see it.
The district did incur a $10 per copy charge for this. Unfortunately, it's because our students don't have any access to any electronics. I mean, I have heard some discussions about giving them a tablet. So here's a perfect scenario. If our students had a tablet, this is a PDF. I mean, so you dump a PDF on a tablet, then there's no printing cost. And the students would have access to it, and it's much more searchable. I mean, then you can, it's a lot easier to navigate through a digital document where you can search and see what the author has to say about different topics without having to flip through the pages. In a more perfect world, our students will have tablets and they'll have access to some of these things.
But yeah, that's excellent. I'm glad you have that. And I wanted to sort of bring us back to the question about like the CDs. If the music on those CDs was licensed under a Creative Commons license, then they could keep those CDs forever because there's no issue with sharing or saving or holding on to that stuff. That's, again, Creative Commons licenses are really awesome, and they're getting used more and more. As Becky was saying, it's becoming a lot more common to see Creative Commons licenses on works.
And the other thing regarding the music, depending on, I know, certain works, obviously, after a certain amount of time, wind up falling out of copyright protection. And some are just Creative Commons licensing or non-commercial, I'm spacing out on the word, royalty free. So one of the things too that we can always help, the library can always assist you with too, is if you wanted them to have access to music beyond just the class time, we could always look and find, it's one thing where you're copying the CD, maybe that comes with a textbook or a course or things like that, versus maybe curating a playlist, so to speak, that is royalty free or Creative Commons licensing, or open access that has some of those works that could be listened to beyond the class period. So that's another possibility, and we could always help you with that, doing some of that searching.
Excuse me, this is Teresa. I wanted to ask a quick question about this. Having not used this before, if one wants to use this, do you just go out to creativecommons.org to see what's there? Or how do you determine the work that you're wanting to use has Creative Commons access, or are they only listed on the Creative Commons work website?
You can search on here for some stuff. I don't think the database is comprehensive. The other thing is, is a general internet search. And it's been a while since I've done it specifically looking for the licenses. I know, and Megan might be more with it than me on this. The other thing is typically on a work, you'll see the icons, or again, text that will show it. Have you
Yeah,
done
most-
search specifically for this, Megan?
Well, I was going to say the only time that I have used the Creative Commons website to search for stuff is if I've searched for images, because images that are openly licensed can be really hard to find, and they do have a good way of searching the Creative Commons site for images. In fact, I think they might even search across a few different areas, because you can search on Google Images, you can specify that you want an openly licensed image. Wikimedia, the media portion of Wikipedia, they also have a way you can search for openly licensed images. So images, I've tended to go to sort of these clearinghouses to search for. But if I'm trying to find you know, an article or something like that, I don't usually go through either the Creative Commons website or something like that. I tend to find the article first, and then it should tell you on the article something about the copyright. So it might have just a regular copyright statement, in which case you know that it's just traditionally copyrighted. It might have a Creative Commons license on it. And so in that case, it'll probably have those little icons that you'll, again, if you start to see these more, you'll recognize them pretty quickly. It's always got that CC and then some combination of either by or ND or NC, stuff like that. So that'll be how you know that it's a Creative Commons license. The tricky thing is, like I said earlier, everything, unless otherwise specified, is automatically copyrighted. So if you're looking at a work and you don't see any information about copyright at all, you have to assume that it's copyrighted, because unless you are otherwise told, it's copyrighted.
Mm-hmm. And there, Megan mentioned the image search, and that's true. It usually pops up higher as like as a filter option in Google. If you go to, in most search views, you'll see an option for settings, and go to the advanced search. So when you do that, you have your search terms up here at the top box. There's a lot of stuff that you don't need, but there is a usage rights down here. So I can go to Creative Commons licenses, and let's say I change my search term to cats. You know, I want something with cats. So images, but let's see. Oh, did it keep that Creative Commons licenses?
So you do always have to double check. Google's not perfect.
I know. I was like, darn, I thought I was going to kind of narrow it down much faster. Give me some documents. I mean, it could be just a bad search. Oh, no, it kept, see? Creative Commons. Let's try this again. See if this actually gives me better results. No, it's like, it's almost like it's taking it off every time I'm doing it. So not the best. Yeah, that's, it has been, I mean, sometimes you can do your search term and literally put Creative Commons right after, just in keywords, if you're looking for documents. But depending on where you're searching, there's different ways. Usually it is images is the fastest and easiest, or music. Anything beyond that may take a little bit more techniques or kind of fiddling around. But you can always check with us. So if you have a certain topic or, you know, area that you want to find materials, the library is always available to help you find those materials, whether it's in our databases or if it's just online. You can always check with us. We will be very happy to help you build content to share with your students in terms of materials.
And I want to share too, there are, since open access is a growing movement, there are a variety of places you can go to search depending on the type of material that you want. So again, like for images, I tend to search Wikimedia. If you're looking for journal articles, there is, I'm putting a link in the chat, there's the directory of open access journals. So you can search for articles here, and this directory links out to, probably not every journal that's open access, but many journals that are open access that you can search. And so anything you find there should have a Creative Commons license. That should be automatically part of it. So if you're looking for articles, that's a great place to go. I don't know if you guys are using, I know Scott said he's using an open textbook, but for other folks, if you've heard of open educational resources, these are often textbooks, but they can be other kinds of, either books or other materials. There's videos, all sorts of things. And so if folks are looking for open educational resources, there's a lot of different ways to search for those as well. And I'm actually the Open Educational Resource Liaison. So if you're looking for help with that, definitely feel free to contact me.
Now, is the time here is just for an hour, right?
Yeah, usually we try to end around an hour, but I'm not sure if there's other questions that people have as they prep for next semester. That's the only thing that I am wondering. We have this, can I print this? I think we ran into unusual circumstances that we didn't anticipate with printing this semester. And I'm trying to avoid that from happening again. And I don't really know how to avoid that from happening again. But on the back end, we have to access lottery funds or something else in order to pay for classroom sets of books. And so it's really difficult at the last minute when we don't know, right, that we're going to now need to purchase these books. So I'm trying to be more proactive, and I was hoping that this would help people begin to be proactive. So yeah, I don't know if people have questions. I don't know if there's other advice that can be offered, etc.
Just wanted to show you all so you can see the PDF too, that this is kind of the flow chart. You can, a lot of what we have in the databases is going to be fine to, print, and particularly for your class settings. It is, fair use is going to change. The dynamic will change based on the fact that you're part of a prison ed program. In terms of some of those 4 factors as well. So, but yeah, you can see, that this is generally going to guide you through. So that way, after all of the little bits here and there that we shared, it gets jumbled really easily. as soon as we all leave the call, it'll be like, that was so great. Oh wait, I can't remember what's what. It just, and even for those of us who have been in this for a long time, it's really easy to just kind of get lost in all of this. So we were hoping that at least this does provide a little bit of that guidance to think about the possibilities, or at least narrow the focus of what then do you need to double check on regarding some things. But yeah, that pro tip with the OER, the Open Educational Resources, Creative Commons licensing is huge. And Megan is an incredibly wonderful resource. One of our newest librarians that we're very, very happy that she's here. And so I definitely contact her. She's very knowledgeable and a great advocate for those open educational resources.
Thank you. Do people have specific questions? My guess is, like Becky said, as people are prepping their classes is when the questions will come up. So if other people have questions, I would love to hear them or throw them in the chat. I want to say that I want to give one example of a way that I think my life would have been easier if I knew this information. And this isn't, I'm not blaming anyone. I just didn't know the information. We're offering 2 sections of abnormal psych next semester, and abnormal psych, textbooks are going to cost a lot. So I happened to find a Facebook group through our department chair in psych, and they listed for me open access to I posted on the group, right? It's a teaching and psychology Facebook group. But I guess I didn't know that I could also just maybe ask Megan.
Well, I actually want to point out that's a great idea, because I can help kind of point you to places where there might be resources, but the subject matter experts are going to be the ones who really know what's good out there, because I am not going to know the difference between a good resource and a bad one. It's not my subject area. So that's a great idea. Reach out to your colleagues, ask people, have you found anything that's openly licensed that covers this topic? Because yeah, people probably have.
One of the other things you might consider, I don't know if you already have a shared drive in Google, but you could always create a shared drive. And for those that are the open, resources or Creative Commons that are useful, then you can always do that and load them onto Google Drive, whether it's organized by course or whatever. But that's another way, just to create your own mini library, at least for the faculty to be able to go and refer to again or use again. I don't know how it is in terms of, I know it's growing, so you get new teachers that come on, but sharing stuff that you do find that's really good and having a repository can just be really helpful. We have a question. Were the grants talked about to make OER textbook? Oh, yes.
So yeah, we didn't talk about that here, but I'm happy to. It's a little bit of a tangent, but basically there is a grant that Los Rios is participating in. So this is a grant that actually UC Davis got for their organization that's called LibreTexts. And so LibreTexts is one of those repositories of open access textbooks. And so they got a grant from the federal government, and we are participating in that folks were able to get a stipend to spend some time searching for open resources in their subject area, basically compiling, okay, here's all these different resources that I found, and here's how I would put them together into a textbook for my class. And so it's basically, you would spend 20 hours doing those searches, compiling that outline that you put together, and then you receive a stipend in compensation for that work. So yeah, if anybody's interested in that, it's each semester we've been doing that project. So currently that's already happening for fall, but if folks are interested in spring, then just, let me know. I send out the email about it to the whole faculty list, but I know those can get buried. So you can reach out to me. I think that this coming summer 2021 is going to be the last semester that they're doing it, because I think the grant runs out. So if folks are interested, either spring or summer would be the last chance.
Yeah, it's a really good project. I did it this fall and I learned a lot from it.
Great.
Yeah, it was excellent.
Awesome. Do people have any other questions? All right, I assume that questions will come up. Thank you, Jasmine. She gave me the LibreText connection to the open access books where we can find them. So it's in, and I think Megan mentioned it as well, LibreText. And then there's also some research guides through Folsom. So I'm trying to get all of these little links to put into our PowerPoint so that and it'll be available on the shared Google Drive. So
yeah, I just wanted to put this last link in there because of the question about repositories. This is a guide that just kind of goes over some basic information. If you look at the Finding OER tab, then it gives you some places to start, because there's actually a lot of different places. It's not just like one place to go to look for open textbooks.
I'd say one final note too is that I know whenever we're getting a training or new information, particularly now with always being on the computer and so many opportunities for that, it's easy to get overwhelmed with, oh, there's this place and that place and this place. I mean, the offer is always open. I mean, absolutely don't hesitate to contact us. Even if the answer is right in front of you and we already shared it with you, don't worry. Just if you feel like you can't make headway and it's just feeling overwhelming, just reach out because we can just kind of nudge you in the right direction or help, kind of synthesize some of it for you that might just get things easier, especially when you're first getting used to a lot of this until it becomes a little bit more secondhand. Yeah, our emails, let me put mine in there. And also we actually do have a chat feature on the homepage of the library. It says Ask a Librarian. And faculty can use that. We've had times where someone just has a really quick question. They kind of want to hop on. If it's during most business hours, Monday through Friday, it's about 8 to 8. Friday, we actually finish a little early. Then you'll get an FLC librarian that we are always available to do a live instant chat with you to address a question. If it's weekends and late evenings, then we're part of a consortium where there's other librarians. You could get one from Australia. And so they can help sometimes too. I mean, they're good. It's going to be a little different than a customized answer, maybe specific to FLC from us.
Awesome. Well, thank you. As people have written in the chat, many of the things you've shared are helpful. And somebody wrote librarians rock, and then I closed the chat. So I don't know who said that. Oh, Kathy said that. So I have found that to be true. Very helpful and very committed to the work that we do to provide academic resources to students. And I appreciate you all taking the time to be here and you all taking the time to create that cool flow chart and also to be an open resource to us as we are prepping for next semester. So I'm going to stop the recording, and if people have other questions, then we can continue that. But I want to say thank you to everyone for coming.